Hey everybody, how's it going? My name is Jamie Fenn, and today I'm going to teach you how to use the face refinement tool in Davinci Resolve. Now this plugin is one of my favorite plugins for my color grading process, and I use it on almost every single one of my videos that has a face in it. This plugin has a bunch of tools that allow you to focus on certain facial features and really bring out details that you want in your video. Now, unfortunately, this plugin is only in the studio version, but if you have the free version, you might as well follow along because you're gonna probably buy the studio version anyways. So now I'm gonna break down the facial refinement tool and everything that you need to know, and then also show you some examples of how I would use them on different types of clips. Here we have a clip of this girl in a car, and I already did some color grading for it, and I did some noise reduction. Now, personally for me, I like to put the face refinement tool earlier in the node tree. So usually after motion blur and after noise reduction. And then you can do your grade on top. But in this case, I sometimes like to do a color grade as well, so you can kind of go back and forth and see how the face refinement tool works with your color grade. And then you can also make color grade adjustments after you do the face refinement tool. So let's go ahead and just add a new serial node. So I'm going to hold down Alt or Option on your keyboard and press S. Then when you come up to your Open Effects tab up here, you want to scroll down until you see Resolve FX Refine. So with the node selected that you want, you can just click and drag the face refinement tool on top. And before we get started, the face refinement tool works really well when the face is clearly shown in the video clip. Higher resolution clips and just good quality shots will let the face tracker work better. So the first thing we want to do when we want to do some face refinement is come over here to the right where it says Analyze and click on Analyze. This will analyze the performer's face throughout the whole clip that you've selected. And what I like to do also when I analyze is just show the overlay. That way you can see if the tracker tracked the person's face accurately or not. So let's go ahead and turn that off. And in our first tab here, we have Skin Mask. And this allows us to see the facial tracker and what it basically tracked. So let's go down to Show Mask. And as you play the clip, you can see that the facial tracker did a pretty good job. And we have some adjustments here like face mask size. Sometimes the tracker will not do the greatest job, but usually does a really good accurate track, and you can adjust the parameters here. Like for example, I'm looking and seeing if her chin is in the shot, and it is, which is good. Next, we can adjust the face mask softness. So if we crank this up, it kind of gives it a nice little faded look. And as you crank this up, you can actually turn up the face mask size as well if you'd like to. And then next we have Refine Mask, which is kind of like blur almost. You can see there's a lot of artifacts when you crank it all the way down. And when you turn the face refinement mask setting up, it kind of softens those edges, which I like to, keep that around the middle point here. All right, let's go ahead and turn off the Show Mask and move on to our next tab, which is Texture. Texture allows you to smooth out someone's skin. And so if you crank this up all the way, you can see it basically just makes her face super smooth. And that's just with the most basic beauty automatic operating mode. So if you actually come up here, there's three options here. You can select smoothing, which is a little bit more advanced. It allows you to control a little bit more parameters as far as how much detail is in the person's face and how much smoothing you want to, add to the shot. Next, we have beauty advanced, which is something I usually don't really tap into just because there's a lot of parameters, and I feel as if the beauty automatic setting works great on its own. And as you can see, if you turn it up in the positive values, it really smooths out her skin. But if you want to make someone look old and wrinkly and like a zombie, you can do that, but we don't want to do that. So I'm just going to turn that up a small amount. All right, so let's go on to the next tab, which is color grading. Now the color grading tab is where you can do a lot of great things. I think a lot of the majority of the face refinement tool kind of lies within this tab right here because there's a lot of key components that you want to adjust. Now the first adjustment that we have here is contrast. And this does exactly what it says. It just adds a little bit more brightness to the face while keeping the shadows kind of darker. And you can crank these up or bring them down as much as you want. They're pretty strong, I would say. Like there's a lot of power in these tools. So you want to kind of just make minor adjustments. If you click and drag the slider, by the way, it kind of goes in bigger adjustments. And if you want to do a little bit more fine-tuning adjustments, you can just click on the number and it drags up in increments of 1. So I'm going to go ahead and just do 0.07. Next, we have mid-tone. Now, this basically just kind of pushes luminance into the skin tones, especially in the mid-tone range, like the gamma. And if you crank it up, you can make her look like a ghost. And if you crank it down, again, it does the opposite effect and makes her face look a little bit darker. I'm just doing very small adjustments. I'm only going to go up to, I don't know. I'm looking at her neck, and I want her neck and her face to somewhat be the same exposure, same luminance. So I'm going to go up to 0.064 just here. Next, we have color boost. Now, color boost basically is like saturation, except color boost pushes saturation into the lower saturated areas, as where saturation just makes the colors more saturated where they are. If you're familiar with Lightroom, it's kind of like using the vibrance slider. So I like to just give a little bit of color boost, but not too much, because what happens is you start to push color into the shadows and it almost looks a little unnatural, where we will be able to fix that in the next couple of tools. Next, we have tint. Now, if you want to make your actor look like the Incredible Hulk, you can just crank the tint down, or you can make her look really sick and sunburned at the beach, or just gross. So we don't want to do that. I typically don't change the tint slider at all unless there's notes from like an editor, or if there's some specific thing that you need to work on. I personally just don't use the tint slider. The next adjustment we have here is the desaturate shadow. Now, if you start to crank up the color boost adjustment here, you may want to just turn the desaturate shadow up just a little bit. If you look here in her cheeks, especially right here, if I crank up the desaturate shadow, you can see it pulls away that color that we somewhat introduced with the color boost. And I don't typically like to crank this all the way up like that, but I do like to just introduce a little bit of desaturation in the shadows, just to somewhat counteract the color boost that we put in. Next, we have shine removal. It can remove shine if you go into the positive values. So if you look at her face, she has some shine on her nose and on her cheeks, a little bit on her forehead. She's in the shade inside of a car, so there's no hard light on her face. Sometimes you'll get a shot that has a lot of hard light and you may need to remove it. So you can turn up the shine removal. As you can see, it basically makes her face look a little bit more flat. And if you start to go into the negative values, you can actually add shine to her face. So if you want it to look a little bit more contrasty and dynamic, you can turn that down. But for this situation, I may just leave the shine removal at where it is, because I don't think there's too much of an adjustment that needs to be done here. Shine removal also helps with sweat. If someone's really shiny, that does really help. So feel free to use shine removal for, maybe someone working out or something. Now we have a bunch of other tools down below that are kind of acting like a digital makeup assistant, and it allows you to really focus on certain facial features. So usually when I have a person that's in the shot and the main focus is their eyes, one, I try to make sure their eyes are in focus with the camera. And then second, I like to also add just a little bit more focus to the eyes area by using a little bit of sharpening. And if you turn this up just even to 0.02, it starts to add a little bit of sharpening to her eyes and her eyelashes. I don't like to go too much with these adjustments, because if you start cranking them up all the way, it makes the person look really unnatural. But so just using subtle adjustments really makes this effect powerful. Next, we have brightening. This is eyeballs, basically, just making the person's eyes a little bit more brighter and whiter. So as you can see, if I crank it up, it looks like she's crazy and a ghost or some type of Marvel superhero. So let's just turn up the brightening to about right there, and that should be good. Next, we can use the eye light. Now, the eye light focuses right around her eyes. So essentially, if I turn this up all the way, you can see that it basically just shines a bunch of light on her eyes, which we don't want, and we also don't want her eyes to be super dark. But it's nice to just make little fine-tune adjustments by pushing this up a little bit like that, so it does draw a little bit more attention towards her eyes. The next thing we have here is eye bag removal. Now, this is really nice when you have a tired actor or someone that maybe has hard shadows under their eyes. And if you turn this up all the way, she doesn't really have it, but I will turn it up a little bit just because there are some shadows here, which is nice to show facial features, but you don't want them to be completely gone by turning this up all the way. So I'm going to turn that up to about 0.1. Kind of smooths things out a little bit for her. Next, we have lip retouching. And this allows us to add a little bit of color to her lips. And also this adjustment here, upper lip smooth, lets us do exactly what it says, add a little bit of softness to her upper lip where people may have wrinkles or a mustache or something, but you can crank this up. And in this case, she kind of just has Not really too much going on as far as the adjustment, just because her face is pretty smooth. And if you look at the saturation slider here and I crank it up all the way, you can see that really, pushes color into her lips, which isn't something that's necessary, I think, in this example. But you can also adjust the hue. So if you want her lips to be kind of purplish or blue, you may have an editor that says, oh, my subject or my model is cold outside, so make her lips look a little bit more blue, or, maybe someone's sick and you can kind of, do this in post if you didn't do it on set. Next, we have blush retouching, and I'm just going to turn up the saturation so you can kind of see where the adjustments are happening. You can see the facial tracker did a really good job at tracking her face on where her cheeks are, and you can adjust the color by just sliding up the hue like this, or you can bring it down. So typically what I like to do is leave the saturation sliders at 0 on these retouching tabs and just change the hue, because when you change the hue, it actually introduces a little bit of color, which is nice. And without adjusting the saturation, because I think saturation kind of makes it look almost a little unreal, or, it just doesn't look good unless that's something you're going for. Maybe you do want to, push some color that far. Just a little adjustments like that. Even pulling the hue all the way up kind of adds her cheeks to be a little bit more rosy. And if you want to, you can also just turn the saturation down. In our next tab, we have forehead retouching. So again, we have the same type of adjustments where you can just add color into her forehead, and say someone maybe has wrinkles in their forehead, you can turn up the smooth adjustment and really smooth out her face. You don't want to do too much. Like I said, she's got pretty smooth skin, and I already did noise reduction on this entire video, so I don't want to go too soft on a lot of areas. Next, we have cheek retouching. Now this focuses on a more broad size. The blush is kind of more of like a highlight, so maybe you would want to do one color as blush and change up the hue just a little bit for her entire cheek. I typically don't play with the cheek retouching too much unless it's totally necessary. The last thing we have is chin retouching, and there is no smooth slider, but you can, give her makeup. To be honest with you guys, sometimes the track doesn't track extremely well, because as you can see, if I turn that up all the way, it says her chin is coming out of her nose. So sometimes these adjustments are not necessary. A lot of the times I just stick with the very basic stuff and doing minor adjustments. And as you guys can see, we have our after, but if I turn this off, you can see now how much of a difference that made. So last but not least, you guys may be wondering, what happens when you have 2 people in your shot? So what I like to do, again, is just have my basic corrections and add a node at the very beginning. So when you drag the face refinement tool onto the node and you want to start analyzing, this is all that you have to do. You select analyze, and then Davinci automatically picks out the faces, and you can just select the person's face by selecting the box. The one that turns blue is the one that you'll be able to do the face refinement on. And if you want to do multiple faces, all you have to do is just add another node and drag face refinement on, click analyze, and then select the other person's face, and then click analyze again, and then make your corrections from there. Hey, if you enjoyed this video, hit that like button, subscribe if you have not already, turn on notifications, send me an email, maybe fax me a photo, whatever you want to do. And also, last but not least, just watch this playlist. It's freaking sweet.